Okay, we're back again. Jen Brazelli.
And Kyle Godby. And these are our field notes.
And I think we're going to try to pick up where we left off at the end of episode 25. So,
hmm
listener, viewer, if you didn't watch
Part
25,
two.
yeah, you might want to go back and watch it. Or maybe just watch like the last 10 minutes of it, because we're not going to rehash all the context kind of leading in, although famous last words, of course we will.
Right, of course.
But yeah, how do you want to pick up? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I went back and I watched it recently. And to not a rehash, but previously on, it looks like we were talking about catharsis and our role as facilitators in what that means and what we get our own satisfaction from as facilitators, what our relationship to that intervention looks like, whether it's cathartic or disruptive or whatever, how we are sort of, how we find our position or what gives us energy or takes energy. I don't think we said that explicitly, but going back and listening to that, I think that was kind of
Implied.
the arc. Yeah, and that's kind of where we ended was, well, if we're not finding real satisfaction or our own catharsis in the facilitation work, does that mean we also are not finding futility in it? And that's when, all right, let's talk futility and absurdism. And that we kind of just had to stop there because that's an easy other hour and a half. And let's save that for today.
Okay, let's go. Well, yeah, and I would say that my mental map of what we were talking about, which is all of that, with an extra like sprinkle of we had been talking about impact on either people or environments, something having an impact on blank on an object, which itself
Leaving our
is,
smudge marks on the world.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
also want to eventually contradict that because I don't even think that's whatever. We can blow that one up next, but the implication around, you mentioned catharsis in that episode. You were talking initially about other humans that you might be collaborating with experiencing some form of catharsis, which again I still am like, ugh, no, ugh, but we don't have to rehash that. But you were talking about it, somebody else having that experience, but and I think implied in that session, but now maybe explicitly here, we're talking more about what we take away, or why, what makes us tick, what drives us or gives us energy in this kind of work in that way. And so at the end, when you were like, well, shit, Jen, if everything you're saying is that you're not really driven by necessarily a need to see that in other people, then like, do you ever feel like this work is futile? Because I do enjoy when I get to see the impacts, but I'm fine when I don't get to know if something
Right.
landed or whatever. I do need the feedback loop to like direct what I'm doing. That's a different conversation. But you said futility, and my brain was like, this is absurdism. So for those who are, okay, caveat for my peers in philosophy, do not come for me. This is way, way, way reduced. But for those who are not familiar, absurdism, right off the bat, when we talk about absurdism, we talk about like Camus, Sartre, whoever. We don't mean absurd in the colloquial sense, like that's just absurd, blah, blah, blah. It's related, but it isn't that simple. The simplest way to think about it in the philosophical sense is that the absurd, is a lack of meaning. It is the meaninglessness of life, living, the universe. And so this like school, or again, I can just hear my philosophy like community being like all over my shoulder right now.
Right.
The specter. The notion is this. One of the central questions that like, I guess philosophy, but also art, of every kind, humans grapple with, is the question of meaning. And where does meaning come from? And does it exist? And what gives us meaning and purpose? And la la la. And there are a lot of answers to that. There have been lots of ways that humans have found answers to that. One is, of course, in religion and faith, where you kind of offload the entire matter to a higher power, a deity or some version of that to give you meaning, and that you are enacting a meaning that you have happily received, thus eliminating the need to really even grapple with the source of the meaning, because you know what? I got this one doled out to me, I'll take it. There is still, of course, that is way flattening it, but there's like the big question of how you even receive that, hear it, interpret it. Like that's, again, so, okay.
Yeah.
There's another response, which is, so say you either don't believe in a God or a faith or a deity, or that's just not your preference. One is to make your own meaning. Very common, like, refrain. I like, meaning is not a thing that exists inherently, that I am creating meaning for myself and my being. I'm defining what my purpose is through whatever it is, through doing, through becoming, through engaging, whatever. I'm creating meaning, for myself and for blah. That is loosely existentialism. Existentialism is essentially, I'm creating meaning. I'm not receiving it from the universe or a deity or whatever. Another option is to go, there is a none. Like, the more you engage with the universe, the more you kind of grapple, especially in I would say an empirical or an evidence or rational, but I don't mean it in the weaponized way. Whatever adjectives you want to use, and philosophers have used many different ones. But the more you engage with the literal natural world around you, the more you would be likely to maybe realize there is no inherent meaning that is being imbued. And so you can say, there is no meaning. It's all meaningless. That's nihilism. So Camus, he opens like Myth of Sisyphus with this point. It's like, he frames it as like the question of suicide. Like, why bother living? Not really because he's like trying to solve that, but that's the best way to create the pencil point, focus on this matter. And his answer is, well, what happens if you accept or have come to understand that there is no inherent meaning and that the universe is meaningless, and that the concept of meaning might be kind of a weird, like, human imposed teleological thing that you might not be interested in participating in. And that meaninglessness is what leads to the choice of, well, if the universe isn't giving me the meaning, I can believe there is no meaning and be a nihilist, maybe take it really far and commit suicide. I could become an existentialist and make my own meaning. I could trust God to give me one or construct one for me. But there's like another way. And the argument is, what if you just accept the contradictions and don't fight to resolve them? The universe is meaningless. There is no inherent meaning in anything. And yet I am still going to act in a way that could be interpreted as if there was meaning in the world. But I know I'm not deluding myself, but I'm just going to act that way anyway. And the language that gets used is like in defiance, and that like the absurd is this idea that the universe, life, living is meaningless. So that is like the absurd, but the absurd in that sense arises from the fact that we also then engage in defiance of that meaninglessness. We don't grasp for meaning that we create. Then you're an existentialist. But instead, you nonetheless behave as if there is meaning, even if you accept that there isn't. Now, there are people who argue that like absurdism is like a subset of existentialism versus like distinct from it. I'm not interested in that argument. But when you asked about futility, of course, like I as an individual, when I first encountered writing on this topic, I happened to come across it at a point in my life where I was already grappling with these ideas. And it wasn't like I read Camus and was like, oh my God, this has just changed how I see the universe. I don't think that's how it works. I don't think you give somebody a copy of one of his books and they go, oh, I see it. I think it is like there's a readiness, or not that like everyone, or, there's a linear, like I'm ready now. It's just that like I was in a place where I was receptive to these ideas. And I just found my way to that writing. But I had already kind of arrived at these ideas. I just didn't have the right language. Now, I didn't like independently invent absurdism. That's not what I'm saying. But I just, when I got there, I was like, shit, he's singing my song, So it worked out for me in that it just gave language to what I was experiencing. And it was like, wow, somebody else kind of figured out I don't really want to be a nihilist. I don't really think existentialism is in that flattened, definition is it. There's something else. So I've blabbed on a long time, but I thought it would be important to set a little foundation on what the fuck we mean by absurdism, because I think even people who've had some, education in philosophy, they don't always get exposure to this wing of it, because like I think a lot of Camus and Sartre and a lot of those guys were not considered philosophy for a long time. By some, they still aren't. Oh, that's literature. Oh, that's, art. It's not philosophy. But I think more and more people recognize that it is. And so I don't say I subscribe to it like that's me, that's my identity, flag in the ground, but more that it's a way of thinking that is just very resonant for me, very resonant, and has been for a very long time, probably since well before I even knew what it was. And so it is the best description of how I reconcile that I do believe there's really no meaning in things, and that there's always that inherent futility, and yet at the same time I can still act in the world in defiance of that fact, and together the contradiction creates this incredibly beautiful thing. And I made the joke last time, and I make it from time to time when it's appropriate, when someone asks about like the bigger purpose, or like what gets you out of bed, or how do you feel knowing XYZ thing is happening, and I think to myself, none of us is getting out of here alive. And I know, and like, or the concept of memento mori, or anything like that has a tinge of the mortality and the end of things in it, that I think some people will go, oh, that's so morbid. And I go, no, man, it's fucking beautiful. Like knowing that these contradictions or paradoxes just simply exist, and not trying and struggling to resolve that what I'm doing might be futile, but I'm gonna fucking do it anyway. That gives me energy. That is my answer to that piece. So when I talk about absurdism, that's why it comes up for me.
Love it. I needed the sort of framing around Sisyphus to get my fingers on this, because this was, and tell me if I've got this right.
Yeah, I was going to say,
got
we should add this to the 101. I should have brought that up explicitly, because everyone trots that quote out, and God, I love it. So go ahead.
Yeah, but it I needed the sort of like the fifth grade sort of philosophy sort of intro to this at this point, which again it was my song, but I didn't go deep. But it sounds like you were, so Sisyphus, for anyone that is unaware, was exiled by the gods, and his punishment was to push the rock up the hill for eternity. It goes up to the top of the hill, rolls down the other side. His job was to then go fetch it, bring it back up the hill. And so what Camus was talking about was, and I think, Jen, you're describing yourself in the archetype of what I heard was absurdism is, it's acknowledging the, not the plurality, but the contradiction of the finite and the infinite. And the pushing the rock up the hill is in defiance of the infinite, is basically giving the middle finger and saying, I'm doing my thing, and I'm devoid of judgment right now, and just doing. The other two, and again, nail me down on this. And that was, he called that as revolt. It was one of the consequences of absurdism.
Yep.
The other one was freedom, where we could never know really what Sisyphus was thinking, but somehow found meaning through reframing what that situation was, and that's your existentialism. That's Nietzsche, and the only freedom that you actually ever have is the ability to reframe what you're experiencing. And the other side is the third one is passion, and that's the Dostoevsky. I'm going to abandon logic to embrace the sort of infinite, which is its own sort of logical conclusion of, if there's no meaning, then I will go to faith, and faith will provide the logic for me. But it's not really logic; like, it's this weird balancing act that happens. But it's basically, what if Sisyphus found that he was an agent of harmony in the universe by pushing the rock up the hill and then fetching it and pushing it back up again, and it's not so much a punishment. All right,
it's close, but notice what you did at the end. I think this is kind of part of the point. It still starts to hint at, well, what if what he was doing was actually somehow furthering a meaningful end? Like, what if
I mean that from a personal sense of his own meaning. Yeah,
but I think that would be the argument that absurdists or that absurdism makes is that it doesn't, that's not even like a necessary component. Like that he can, I was going to find the quote and I'm going to read it in a second because I think it's good to have, but it's not that he realizes that he was somehow contributing to the harmony of the universe, or I said that weird, harmony, I like that, let's harmoniousness, the harmony of the universe, but that he can himself find peace with it and take delight and joy in it, and not in like a selfish hedonistic way, but just the piece that I bristled at the tiniest bit was not that he could take the personal level of like peace or satisfaction in it, but that you had that extra bit about, well, what if what he's doing is contributing to the harmony of the universe, or what if it's not? What if what he's doing is making everything worse? Because again, there isn't like an inherent meaning or purpose to something. So that's the piece that's really, really hard for people to kind of grapple with. But none of what I'm saying I think necessarily contradicts. I think what you've laid out is good, and I'm actually really glad because, so the myth of Sisyphus I referenced a couple of times earlier. I was referencing Camus' work. There's a book. It's really a long essay. It's really short. You guys should just all go read it. Not the actual Greek myth, but the book is about the Greek myth, because he is using the Greek myth of Sisyphus to make his point, as Kyle has just so eloquently outlined. And those three, I'm going to find the quote in a second, but those three pillars, the revolt, freedom, and passion, those are Camus, like when he goes, okay, we're not nihilists, we're not existentialists, we're not getting our meaning from God, so if we're all going to embrace the absurd, what does that fucking mean for us? Those are the three pillars that he says can, I don't even want to say drive you. They don't give you meaning, they don't drive you, but they are the things that you lean into. The revolt is that defiance of the meaninglessness without necessarily trying to disprove it or make it go away. It's like, I acknowledge exists, it can sit right next to me. Like, I think about meaninglessness as sitting in the seat next to me on this like subway car that is life. And I'm not going to get up and move away from it. I am not going to try to make it get up and get away from me. I might engage it in conversation, but I'm not going to try to change it. It's just here with me. But that I am going to continue to conduct myself with, you know, everything we've said, this level of like, I'm going to do shit as if there is meaning, even if there isn't. That's the revolt piece, which is kind of the spirit of what you said, but I figured I would tie that because I had mentioned the defiance piece earlier. There's the freedom, obviously, liberatory politics and liberation in general is clearly something we've talked quite a lot about, central to a lot of how I engage in the world in every facet, not just work. And then, you know, everything that you've gone through, I would agree with. And the passion part, you said at some point, like, not necessarily in opposition to logic, but it's tricky. We've talked about logic and different ways of knowing, so we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. However,
right.
Anybody who gets into Camus, and there's a trope of a human who does, and somewhere in a bio somewhere they'll have one must imagine Sisyphus happy, you know, in their quote, whatever, a little spot in their bio, and there's a little bit of a something there. But we all have to go through that phase, just like our Don Quixote complexity phase, where we all quote our Camus. But I do think that if someone's going to reduce the book down to that idea, I wish they would take the slightly longer version, because that's actually the very literal last line of the book. And if you want to be one of those people who takes a quote from the very last paragraph of a book, take the whole paragraph. So I'd like to read it. It's not that long. But he takes us through this whole journey, and he talks about everything I said at the beginning, and he talks about the three pillars that you walked through, and it's, like I said, really lovely. And then he says, I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one burden again. So let me pause, because the point is, everything you do is Sisyphean in its futility, but like finding the thing at the bottom of the hill again is like this really important moment. Anyway, so one always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe, henceforth without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. So, like, the word that I don't think gets trotted out enough, but is kind of at the heart of all of it, is the struggle, the aspiration, the striving, and doing it knowing, clear-eyed, that you're not ever going to get there and stay there is the extra piece. And that's absurdism. So when I engage in anything, not just work, but work and all the things we talk about, especially when it's a challenging time where it's futile and like really obviously futile, or even in those environments where I don't know, because I will not have the luxury of seeing the second order, third order, fourth order effects of my work. I just trust and accept that whatever is going to happen happens regardless of me being able to see it, in much the same way that I've pushed that ball up that hill as far as it'll go. And maybe I get to the top for a minute, maybe I don't. Somewhere in the book he describes like when Sisyphus is like walking back down, that piece of what that experience must be like, you know. And I honestly have come to look at almost everything that I engage in is some kind of form of that cycle. And I ask myself at different points in my life, it could be from day to day, and it could be like the longer seasons of my life, where am I at? Am I pushing a rock up a hill right now? Did I just watch the rock roll down the hill right when I got to the top? Am I on the walk back down, enjoying the slow walk back down to the bottom before I get my ass behind the rock to start pushing again? And like, where are you at in any part of your life, or even in a part of a project, or in the part of a day? Like, where are you at in that cycle? I can find that to be, I don't literally meditate on that all the time, but like, I think philosophically that's part of the value. So, yeah. Actually, you know what? Since I have the Goodreads page open with that quote, I happen to see this one too. And I think it might be, here, let me read it. Just thank you for indulging me. Likewise, enduring every day of an unillustrious life, time carries us. But a moment always comes when we have to carry it. We live on in the future. Tomorrow, later on, when you have made your way, you will understand when you're old enough. Such irrelevancies are wonderful, for after all, it's a matter of dying. Yet a day comes when a man notices or says that he is 30. Thus he asserts his youth. But simultaneously, he situates himself in relation to time. He takes his place in it. He admits that he stands at a certain point on a curve, that he acknowledges having to travel to its end. He belongs to time, and by the horror that seizes him, he recognizes his worst enemy. Tomorrow, he was longing for tomorrow, whereas everything in him ought to reject it. That revolt of the flesh is the absurd. That revolt that is outlining in some sense is the absurd. The destined to be futile, but forever striving aspiration to defy it. And not trying to resolve the paradox, but just live in it.
Yeah, the quote I wrote down, doing a little bit of homework on this, was the struggle. I did a little homework. I finally prepped for one of these. We didn't just flip it on and say, "What do we want to talk about today?" We
had
a little bit of
it on. Shit, I didn't know you prepped. Now
well, I needed to do a little bit of homework.
Fine, it's fine. Good, it's good.
The quote I got was that the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. That's, I think, what you were just saying.
Yeah, it's from the end, that end paragraph.
Yep. And it's kind of fascinating the all is well component is there as well, because if I were Dostoevsky, this was a key component in one of his books, and I don't remember, the Brothers
Karamazov.
Thank you. Right, this is the one where the one brother, really, this is one of the brothers kills himself to either become God or meet God. It doesn't. That's kind of what he's reduced everything to. Am I getting this right?
Yeah.
But his final words were all is well.
We need to I mean, the fun thing is now go Google like absurdist literature and absurdist movies and absurdist art, because that is where it's at. That is what
I'm coming from that angle. The movies, the arts, the Dadaism, the punk movement, all that kind of stuff.
Should we talk about where absurdism shows up? Because you made a good point to call out, and these are some of the common. So if someone's read their Camus or some of the other contemporaries, okay, fine. There are a lot of other authors. Dostoevsky's one. I think that Joseph Heller's Catch-22 is a really good one too. Have you ever read Catch-22?
I've never read Catch-22. That might not be. I maybe. I don't know.
Oh, it's so good. Okay.
I went through a period of like I just blindly read a whole bunch of stuff. This was like 20 years ago, and it was
Shit off
all
the
like
Golden bookshelf like I used to.
it was like one of those. Yeah, I found like a good book. This is long before like Reddit. Somebody gave me a syllabus, and I went, "Yes, I'm going to eat all of it." And then I come back. This is how I started down the Austrian economics sort of rabbit hole, and now I've sort of buried all that, and I think anything that was conjoined, just by my experience.
Before we end up down this, where I know we both want to go, which is talk about like the best absurdist movies. But this is maybe the difference between why this was my answer to the thing you post at the end of the other episode. Versus for I think a lot of people it's just, oh, that's just an interesting way of thinking about the world. For me, and I know I've alluded to this, but like when I did encounter this, again, I had already kind of really been grappling with a lot of these as a young person, these ideas, but I didn't have like the intellectual maturity, even having read a lot of shit at a pretty young age that maybe a lot of people don't unless they're total dorks. I didn't really just have the level of like life experience, an intellectual experience and maturity to be able to frame some of these things. So it was like I had these proto versions of these ideas, but when I read something as articulate and compelling as Camus' works, I was like, whoa, this is awesome. But it wasn't just, wow, I can really appreciate what he's saying. Let me analyze this like analytically and measure this against other schools of thought and philosophy, which I think a lot of philosophy people like to do, is like, let's compare Sartre's versus Camus versus and like blah, blah, blah. So, but for me, it was boom, like immediately went right inside. And it was more that, like I said earlier, it resonated with me. Like everything in me suddenly like vibrated on the exact same wavelength as what he was writing. And so I felt seen, as I've joked about before, by a dead white guy, and I, that is kind of the difference, which is to say, I'm not just an appreciator of certain types or blends or flavors of interrogating the world, that which I am, many are, but I also think that it has been really instrumental and helpful for me to have this construct, not because I abide by it or follow it or anything, but more that it gives a bit of, again, it gives me purchase. We joke a lot about, maybe not even joke, we talk a lot about how people like to have frameworks, or they like to have something they can hold on to. Well, if I'm adrift at sea and I don't have a life preserver or something, if I'm not on hard ground, we grasp for things, right? And it doesn't have to be a thing that holds you stationary. It could be a thing you float along with, but it gives you that security. And so for me, especially growing up, this was part of it. So as far as like the actual philosophical, like existential underpinnings of like why we do what we do, and like when I'm in a room full of people and I'm either facilitating a literal workshop or I'm just working on a project that isn't just all workshops, but like, includes lots of other activities, some very mundane, some not. This is like whirring in the back of my head. And I don't think that's true for everybody, and I think that's fine and good that like not we all are kind of making sense of and interrogating what we do differently. So it's just convenient that when you're like, I am driven by or energized by seeing my actions have this impact on another human, and that makes total sense. You don't need a lot of fancy language to explain that. I think that's pretty relatable. Meanwhile, I'm over here like, I don't feel that way, and I don't have good language for why I don't. And then Camus' writing at like age, 15 or something helped me realize that the way I feel is like just as legitimate. It's not just an absence of another way of thinking, that it is on its own a thing. And that was what it did for me to give me that language. So it's a shortcut for me now to say, yes, what I do might be futile. It's not always, but it's okay, because like when you lean into the absurd, it's a powerful fucking thing, man. All is well. The struggle alone is enough to fill a man's heart, and I have experienced that like a lot. So anyway, now want to talk movies?
We'll get there. Yes,
I'm just joking. Go ahead.
I gotta, because yes, of course. But there are so many different. This is another really rich one. And for everyone listening, like I think we'll get into practice at some point in this. We'll get down to
Will we?
But light your pipe for now. Yeah, I think we'll end there.
Just scrub forward. We'll try to make some hand signals when we're ready to talk about something.
We'll wave for the plane. So, what you're making me think of is the communities of practice that we are a part of, that are a gathering of people that are interested in these ideas and this work and have this momentum and this sort of, we are all finding similar attractors out there. It's what I found a few things really interesting about this over the last couple of years. One is that I don't know that anyone would necessarily say I'm embracing futility, but just about everyone has a really good story of, this is how I see the world, this is my natural sort of place in it, but it has been full of friction for as long as I can remember. And I've got two options. I can either force myself into some sort of conformity and meld in, which is, for some people, a little bit easier than others. For some, it's absolutely impossible, and they don't even understand that is accessible in any way. But everyone coming together and having that shared sort of friction and experience and attractor has also been very energizing and validating, kind of the way that you found Camus. But what's interesting is how I find, for me, going in and facilitating these things, I did say I really enjoy those moments. Those are definitely energizing, and they sort of, that's that response from the universe saying, yes, there's something here. Yeah. Not from the universe, though. It's totally relational between me and the people that are in that room. But at the same time, very much energizing. But I don't think that's nearly as energizing as being around other people that are also starting to, where we're validating each other. And we're doing that through getting excited about each other's ideas, and we're sharing these things. It's the same as what we talked about last week in the music sharing of, I get to introduce somebody to a new band, they really like it, that's awesome, I'm going to introduce you to something else, and vice versa. And I found something new, you're part of that. For me, and this is really interesting too when it comes to the neurodivergent communities that I'm in. Not a particular community of practice, but when we openly talk about this.
I was about to ask, is there
neurodivergent
you guys have
friends.
a secret club that I don't know about?
We don't have a club anymore. Yeah, there's no handshake, there's no anything like that. It is quite vibrant.
There's certainly no eye contact, tell you that.
Yeah, we do travel in packs, and we can spot each other in the room in a lot of cases, but that is not an end-all be-all by any means whatsoever. You meet one neurodivergent person, and means you've met one neurodivergent person. So there's not a lot of, carbon copying going on there. But I have found that, and I think we talked about this months ago, there's an attractor there in this world of facilitation and sense making, and so much of what I hear over and over again is, again, that I see the world in this particular way. But the other part is not just the friction, it's the incompatibility that comes with being neurodivergent in a neurotypical system. And that ability to to embrace the revolt is sort of just like that. It's sort of trained from the very beginning. It's to say, like, rejection is going to be where you live now with a lot of these ideas, with a lot of trying to explain how you see things or how you want to do things or the trajectory or how you relate to things. Rejection is just where we live now. In a lot of cases. And so coming together and finding people that aren't going to reject each other is obviously an amazing place to find, and I encourage everyone to find that place. But it's also interesting to hear, and I often said this about my friends, that I grew up in the New York suburbs, and just I grew up in the last New York suburb in the Hudson Valley, and just north and just west of me were it was very rural, and I had a lot of friends out there. They were I grew up in a neighborhood where all the kids came out and we just did stuff, and somebody got to play a Nintendo eventually, and we ended up at their house and that kind of thing. My friends in the rural world, this is like up in the Catskills, whatnot, didn't live in neighborhoods, there weren't other kids around, kind of thing, and so they just made things. They were at home they were reading, they were like, it was amazing having like the juxtaposition between my suburban friends and my rural friends, and they kind of just made, what was amazing was, and I still see this today with the people that, especially in the highly voyeuristic world that we live in, there's a bit of exhibitionism that happens with my friends that are that I grew up in the city or in suburbia, where it's, I made a thing, look at this. And there is a relationship that is sort of the proxy for, or a primer for a relationship. Now we've got something to talk about. Now we can exchange these things we made. Whereas my friends that grew up in the mountains, you kind of just end up at their house and you're like, what is this thing in the corner? And they're like, yeah, well, I decided I was going to try, I can never remember the name of it, the Japanese art of fixing broken things with the gold. Why can I never remember the name?
Thingy, something like that.
Yeah. So like, I just decided I was going to do that. So that's all the stuff that I've been, and I had no idea you were making that. Well, it's not for you. It was for me. And there's a very personal relationship to that sort of thing. So now I'm rambling and watching all of these things sort of like coexist. But I'll leave it there. Then because I want to hear what that sparks for you. But then I had something else.
Well, there's like a bunch of different things that I was like, ooh, I'm gonna write that down. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that I want to get on the neurodivergent track.
There's two different tracks of Revolt that I saw.
Yeah.
One was sort of ambivalent.
Yes.
And the other was sort of normalized and conditioned.
Well, so and this is, I swear to God, this is not me being like, well, actually. But it's probably worth pointing out, especially for folks who are not familiar with like absurdism, that in absurdism, the concept of revolt is really specifically tied to revolting against the meaninglessness. Like, in other words, the choice to accept meaninglessness and yet not commit suicide, which is like the obvious conclusion if things are meaningless. You can argue with that, but like that's the assumption, right?
Right.
That's the revolt. The revolt is just in the being. It is not what you do with your time. It is not what you do. Those are all extensions, right? Those are all secondary. This isn't me being like, I don't know, what you're talking about isn't revolt, Cal. But the reason I'm bringing that back in, though, is because the word revolt then triggers these examples where by virtue of just being, you are, by being somehow in friction with something. We're now beyond like absurdism and those definitions and just talking about when you're being, is in some level of contradiction to or whatever, something else, and what you do in response, and whether it's that you kind of lean into just being of yourself, or you might seek out those spaces where you don't feel like you are an outsider anymore. This is not me summarizing what you've said. This is me just kind of, and even though I said I don't want to go down the neurodivergent path, though, but part of what that always makes me think about is like, what a charged choice it is to even use the word neurodivergent. Divergent from what? Okay, neurotypical. Well, who's fucking neurotypical? And I don't want to do the whole like, well, everyone's neurodivergent. But, someday you also have to peel apart being neurodivergent versus possessing or experiencing either diagnosable, self or clinical or otherwise, challenges or things that might be both a problem or a disorder and a superpower. Like, we don't have to do all that either. But having dyslexia, having ADHD, having autism, to me, are not just one and the same as being neurodivergent, which I think a lot of people reduce it to.
Yep.
And I still and increasingly struggle with what I thought and think today still is a meaningful choice in the service of a good intention, but becomes a little too black and white for me in that divergent versus typical. And the implied us and them, or in or out, or I'm an outsider here and I'm accepted here. And it could go either way. Because I know there are plenty of people who are part of the neurodivergent community that I know and am friends with who say some pretty kind of shitty things about the neurotypicals. And it's like, so it goes both ways. You know what I mean? Now that's the same as like, a power dynamic where not all men, or like, oh no, the non-white people are saying bad things about white people. That's reverse racism. And it's like, nah, okay, like, let's look at the last fucking millennia of behavior, like who's still got the power in this dynamic. So this isn't me being like, hey, what about the neurotypicals? But it's more that regardless of all of those political implications and respecting the experiences that everyone has that have led to wanting to be able to find your people that way, I wrote down attractor versus echo chamber. Mm-hmm. And I think the challenging thing, and this does tie to both our practice as well as to absurdism, is staying aware or cultivating the awareness in the first place and maintaining that sensitivity at all times to when something is more of an attractor, in that it allows you to find other people who will validate you. Doesn't mean they agree with you, but who will validate you, and where you feel welcome and you feel safe to explore things, all the positives that we all want as humans, and where that tips into being an echo chamber, where you won't be challenged and you won't be, well, all the reasons an echo chamber is a derogatory term. And this isn't like a cautionary, like, no, be careful, your club but I am really interested at how you meaning one, how we walk that line. And especially even in work we do, sometimes your role is to make a space more like an attractor. And sometimes it's to make it less like an echo chamber. From the exact same place and posture, as a consultant or as an internal employee, whatever it is. And that is a little bit like the Sisyphean climb up the hill to me in a lot of ways. So this was a winding path to get there, but I hope folks follow me okay. That listening to you talk about that component of it, that is what it sparked for me. And like communities of practice or communities of interest or just communities of people who find each other, we sometimes talk about like an attractor, whether literally or as a metaphor, and forget that like attractors don't just always exist forever and ever. Like this is an attractor. It existed from beginning of time and it will exist till the end of time. And like that ain't how it works, An attractor develops, comes into being, and may also then dissolve and leave, and or leave being or no longer be. And that's something that I think is tricky in the world that we occupy, whether it's people who have encountered a lot of friction in the world, have been made to feel like outsiders, who have not found a comfortable home for exploring the things, the ideas, the practices, the creativity that they want to live and be and see in the world. And so when we find each other wanting to revel and enjoy and delight in that, these are like beautiful, good things that I want to see more of in the world. But how do you maintain the loosey-goosiness of it so that it can be a functional attractor, but not be an attractor in that long-term sense that then can crystallize? So,
all right.
Anyway, if you want to go back to the other thing you were going to say, you can. I think
no. Well, this is kind of it. You kind of, you
all
gave
right,
me a nice
cool.
little kind
Look at us. Just line it up.
You said it. Like I think it's really it does us no service at all to identify these are the neurotypical people over here, and this is neurodivergence over here, and this is what their role is or what they do, what makes them those things. So much as if there is if we have designed the world for physically able people, then we have marginalized anyone that is outside of that bell curve. And if there's a physical acknowledgement of that, is there also a cognitive acknowledgement of that? And that could be anything from ADHD to PTSD to dementia. It's cognitive. Is there a cognitive incompatibility with the society that we're building, the system that we're operating in at the moment, those sort of things? And that can be very localized or very universal, however you want to take that. And that's why we self-organize, is to navigate through all of those things. In some cases successfully or with lines of flight, in some cases absolutely without, or some degree of adaptation, right? But you said something really interesting, which was another thing that I've been thinking about for a bit, that this, I didn't expect this to kind of tie into, but you kind of have to have a schema available to determine which is which is, you know, within the bounds of typical versus incompatible. And that's not just at a cognitive level, that's at every degree of relationship to some extent. And you and I were in a conversation that we didn't record, maybe a week or two ago, where somebody asked, we were talking about trilemmas or trialectics. And those are two different things, trialectics. And if we have patterns and we have anomalies, what might be the third component to fill out that trialectic? And when I was poking around and when I was sort of thinking about this a bit, schema was the thing that came up for me as being that third component. And it's because it's heavily related to how we determine what is a anomaly versus what we can determine as a pattern. And so whether it exists really on a trialectic, we probably need to push that a little bit, because it seems like it's more part of rather than coexisting with as its own thing. But where did this tie in to absurdism? It didn't quite tie into absurdism. You kind of just passed it over there. I think we can find our way back to absurdism
You don't
through
have
this.
to. It doesn't have to be the core.
No.
It was the link from the last episode, and okay. I have a response to the thing you just said, but
Please.
also just on the topic of absurdism. And then if we don't come back to it, I think it's okay. But I feel like I would pose to anybody listening, like, the reason we bother to even take this little like side quest into like absurdism is because I find, as a practitioner who leverages a lot of things that come from the world of complexity and systems, cybernetics, learning science, like all the different schools of sense making, decision science. I mean, all of these, for me personally, absurdism is so insanely relevant. But again, I don't believe you can just hand somebody, you know, a Camus book and they go, oh, I agree. Like, I think it's truly this resonates for me in the way that I've moved through the world, and it might not for somebody else, but it's more like this undercurrent, in much the same way we've talked in recent chats about sort of anarchist philosophy as well. And there's a reason where a couple of years ago someone said this to me and I went, yes, this is true. Like, my little bio for like a social media account, something flippant, really should be anarcho absurdist agential realist. That's my other third facet, I guess. It would be some form of Baradian new materialism. We gotta get some blues in there and I'll be happy. But those things aren't just me being cute and cutesy and like trying to like identify, like, these are, I'm an Enneagram type 5. Like, it's not that. It's not the spirit of that. It's not, I'm an anarchist. Now you know everything you need to know about me. I feel like these threads are not actually as distinct as we think they are. So, sure. Anyway, but to that end, so because okay, on the topic of like the schema, anomalies, patterns, you know, I hear as you're talking about this, and in the spirit of what I was saying earlier too about the schema in which even the concept of typical versus divergent even exists, when does it dissolve, right? When you change there's an orientation implied in this, that the orientation then impacts what you actually can see and observe. And it made me think of, like, Dave has some recent blog posts about Boyd's OODA loop. And this was something that always bothered me about the way that I saw people refer to OODA. And the O's are observe and then orient. And I've always struggled. Now, again, I'm a fan of Boyd's writing, and, I'm a student of Boyd, I guess, in the way that many people might be, but I'm nowhere near, like, I'm not the super fan. I haven't done all the deep dives. But this was one piece that always bothered me, and I knew it was more a function of how I just saw people, like, saying, here's the loop, we follow it in order, observe first, then get yourself oriented. And I'm like, what? It never happens like that. Orienting never happens after observing. Are you fucking kidding me? They're like obviously commingled, but that is the thing that I appreciated most in Dave's recent stuff, was really calling out, and Dave having the experience and interactions with Boyd and others, that to be able to back this up, which I wouldn't have, but even that he himself, Boyd, would have probably said the same. Your orientation shapes what you observe. These things are like recursively intermingled, right? So to that end, as far as, I don't want to know if I want to get into a trialectic conversation about pattern, schema, and anomaly, but that becomes the process by which you're paying attention to, even if the thing that is a community, an attractor, becomes an echo chamber, does not become an echo chamber, a line of flight, whatever you want to talk about. I think I said earlier, a sensitivity, and I think packed into the word sensitivity is the always shifting, morphing, doing one of those psychedelic weird videos you watch of the shapes that are always just changing into each other. Like, fucking, isn't that not life? It's just like, it's this shape and it turns into this shape and now it's this shape again. That is your orientation, and that is also then how you define these things in contrast to each other. And yeah, I don't know. I have like, okay, there's something else I wrote down too, which actually harkens back to the designing the world in ways that are or aren't, welcoming or accommodating to different people. But I'll say one last thing on the orient thing. No, maybe I'll save it for later. Okay. We'll see if that sparks anything, but the sensitivity piece is something I've just been paying attention to lately, right? What does it mean to operate with a sensitivity to something? Turn up the sensitivity knob. If I have an electromagnet, that is not just like a static magnet, but a magnet that is powered by a current such that I can turn it up or down so that it will have a higher sensitivity in the colloquial sense. As a physicist, you can say, it's a stronger field, it's exerting a stronger force, there's a calculation, fuck all that. But the colloquial sense would be like, ooh, that's a really sensitive magnet. Like, put anything all the way over there and suck it right in. Versus if it's not a very sensitive magnet, it might not suck something in from very far away. I'm less interested in the sucking in part, because that's just the magnet metaphor doing too much work, but the sensitivity of how you turn the knob up or you turn the knob down. And people being born from a cognitive perspective with predispositions from nature versus nurture, the nature piece of it, to already have at your baseline a higher sensitivity to things, anything, not all things. For some people, it's certain kinds of things, certain sensory experiences. For some people, it might be certain forms of information or gestalts. For other people, it might be arrangements and relationships. For some people, it then can be, impacted through life and experience or trauma or whatever. And so the piece of it that is the nature, and then there's the nurture on top of it. And I've just been, with no conclusion to this sentence other than to say this is one of the rocks I'm currently pushing up a hill, is that I'm intrigued by notions of sensitivity. And we'll leave it at that. But a lot of what you were talking about and a lot of what I just mentioned to me were all braided together into sensitivity. Now, this other piece, and it's probably not unrelated, but when you mention, and it's probably due for us to say, is when we talk about, we design the world. If we design the world in a way that does not accommodate people with, say, physical differences, think about what we are missing out on, what we're closing off, what we're foreclosing if we don't put wheelchair ramps on, curb cuts, on things. And so the cognitive equivalent of that, as you alluded to. And I wanted to just call out that, I think we often take as a given that we've designed the world. She says, pregnant pause. So do we design the world? Do we design the environment even in which we operate? Do we, I'm not about to make a concluding response to myself here. I leave it open. But, where my brain went as I thought that, is there is a difference between designing handrails that are part of a stairway and crutches that someone carries with them, or a cane, or so a mobility aid that is something that is an affordance that a person carries with their being, that someone can acquire or build for themselves, or whatever metaphor. And there are affordances that you can engineer into an environment. And I'm not about to play a bunch of word nonsense here and be like, we don't design those. Yeah, we fucking design those. We design crutches. We design canes. We design handrails. But are we designing the environment? Are we designing the experience, right? And this is like experience design master's degree 101 level shit. I'm not trying to be all like, but to the point you were making earlier about how our interactions make things more or less possible, especially when we find communities or relationships with other people who share some and don't share other, cognitive or perceptual or experiential lenses on the world.
Or ethical.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the most divergent thing on the face of the planet. You are free to pick any of those, or pick the other things you wanted to talk about. Like, I don't think we have to create like a nice, neat, tight narrative for every episode. Plus, I actually need to probably go sooner rather than later. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because there's another like to be continued.
I just railed the hell out of this one. I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the last 3 minutes.
This was good. Yeah, because this is a big to be continued.
This is the equivalent of movies that would have like the end ? And you're just like, shut the fuck up, movie. Like, stop.
Right.
Stop, please. Like, that's how I feel like.
Self-indulgent. Yeah, that's what it is. It's self-indulgent. So, where I think there is a little bit of I don't want to say a bow here, but something that I'm hearing you and digesting along with everything else we've been talking about, and sort of I've also had in the back of my mind, let's not just have this, let's just not float in space for the whole conversation. Let's bring it back to some sort of practice to some extent. And that might be a little bit of an anchor at the moment. But thinking about when we talk about sense making, even when some of the stuff that I was finding on Camus and the framing, one of the arguments was that depending on whether you take a theological or morally sort of grounded, with the asterisks, grounded definition of meaning versus a utilitarian definition of meaning, that's going to also skew this in an interesting way as well. And so there is... Where was I going with that? There is still when we talk about our sense making and our intersubjective learning, I think that's the power of this work, is that it allows that exploration in an interesting way. It's the schema itself that allows us to sort of redefine what is legitimate and what is not, where those boundaries of what might be colloquially absurd or incompatible or accessible or afforded, those sort of things. And I don't know that I've ever sat down and thought of it in that way specifically. And it's obvious to me now that that's kind of what I've been dancing around. I've heard us all dance around in an interesting way, but that's, to me, an interesting core of it. And thinking about that and your question about whether or not we design things, when you consider assemblages and point in time and all of that sort of stuff, obviously we don't have the intention is whatever's available in that moment, and carries a lot of history with it, and so to an extent it's intentional, but it's still an adaptation of the environment. But also, we design the building and how to operate in it, and then the building designs how we live in it, those sort of things. So, again, no conclusion on any of that. I don't know. There is no neat bow. There's just I found some more of the string and loosened it from the bow.
Yeah, or maybe the rock's about to roll back down. Like, hey, yeah, maybe that's fine. I think, though, it's an interesting question for our design friends who watch this. Probably most people who touch design and care to watch these stupid YouTubes are familiar with, like, the 4 orders of design, like the Dick Buchanan stuff. And it has always struck me that you almost kind of end up in this weird, maybe it's a paradox or maybe it's just a weird, like, Chinese finger trap thing where we're almost always talking about something that is at an order above where we actually have the levers to, quote, do design, like in the traditional sense of design. So you made the point, like, I designed the building, and then the aggregation of the buildings and the interactions between the people and the things that are happening in between them and among them is what gives rise to and is maybe defined as, like, business or society. Did we design business? No, but we designed the pieces. And so it almost becomes like design is this weird reversal of the, reduction by parts argument everyone makes about why complexity in systems are a better way of viewing the world than reduced mechanical metaphors for things. And it just, I don't know, this might be a good topic for a future time, is that question of, I'm not about to stand here and say humans don't design anything. Of course we fucking design things. Thankfully, sure. I drive over bridges and I drive a car and I walk around the town. Like, come on, I'm not being like that. But I am kind of posing the question, is what happens when you actually face, like, head on the fact that a lot of times the things we're talking about wanting to design, whatever level of, granularity we're talking about, is often a level outside of what we actually can or have the leverage to design. So I can design the pictures on the page, but I can't design the way that someone experiences that when they read the thing. I can design the buildings, maybe I personally can only design the chairs inside the building, but I can't design the building. Like, I just think there's an interesting probably thing to play with there. But back to your other point about when it comes to practice, the other thing that strikes me around absurdism is that for folks who are especially tuned into non-teleological ways of working, right? Not if you're working with an organizational kind of environment, complex system, whatever, and you are committed to the understanding that you cannot dictate the exact outcome. You see a lot, and I'm seeing especially lately, everyone's picked up on the word, like an anti-teleological. Like, I'm like, these are do the Google Ngram for that in about a year. I'm just like watching it. But absurdism has an interesting analog or functions as an analog to that in the, like, ethical purpose piece of it. Because if the whole point is to embrace that you cannot have the ends figured out in advance, I think what rides along with that is the idea of a meaning or a purpose for some action we might take. And well, if we're going to say we're not operating in a teleological way, then what does the meaning of purpose even mean at that point anymore? What do you do when you don't even know what purpose means anymore? I don't know, you pick up fucking Camus. And I'll say, that phrase, I forget who the quote is originally from, but it's like, the purpose of a system is what it does. Remember when we had that time you talked about the map is not the territory and how you hate that phrase? That's one for me. This is one for me because, and I have to admit, I'm not like a historian. Was it Ackhoff? Was it Beers? Who was this one?
It's always attributed to Donella Meadows.
Is it Meadows?
I don't think everybody says it's
regardless.
Probably not her.
It belongs to the community now.
Ackhoff, yeah.
It's of the commons. Whoever said it, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, though, and assume that they didn't mean, like, the way that I see a lot of people take this is like this weird, like, conspiracy awakening, like, the healthcare system is terrible. It's not actually broken. It was designed to do what it's doing, which is line the pockets of the share. And people hear the purpose of the system is what it does. And they then read backwards and say, that means there must have been some nefarious thing that designed the system to meet the purpose. Like, it's a backwards,
right.
check to find out what was the purpose. And I assume the origin of this quote was actually exactly what we've talked about, which is not now. It's that there is not a purpose in the teleological sense. The purpose of the system is simply what emerges from the system. It is the thing that the system is constructed structurally to be able to do by virtue of how it has come to be. Therefore, it is doing what it is doing, and you can call that the purpose. And like the better solution would be just to drop the fucking concept of purpose of a system for exactly that reason. And I've caught myself many a time seeing that quote get trotted out and think to myself, people need to just get over the idea of a system having a purpose, because purpose always brings along the baggage of the human meaning of purpose, and that is not how systems operate. It's a complex system.
And this is how it gets bastardized too, because purpose wasn't actually in the quote. It's the outcome of a system.
Fair point.
Which makes a lot more, when in an Aristotelian sense, that makes so much more sense. The way the system reveals itself.
It's a truism. It's like a worthless truism in that case. But again, it makes the point.
Where I found this not so much advantageous, but where I found people that when I said it and they heard it for the first time went, oh shit, I didn't. It's the people that are sitting down and saying we have to fix the problem. Yeah. It's supposed to work like this, but there's a divergence somewhere. Something is broken and it's outputting something like this. And the answer is nothing's really broken in it. This is just the new disposition of it. And now we are generating this thing that you don't like. Yeah. Let's call it that. Yeah. But that helps me then make the jump out of a very process Six Sigma world into more of a let's consider the plurality of all of this.
That's part of the leap from complicated to complex, like ontologically speaking, right? I think you can have a complex system really can't be broken. A complicated system can be broken. A system that has been engineered and designed to work a certain way and have parts that are supposed to follow repeatable protocols or whatever can stop doing that. And I could accept the argument that this was a system that was supposed to operate in a way that is ordered and predictable and didn't because a component didn't do what it was supposed to do. And that's not a function of the system adapting and emergence. That's just something not doing what it's supposed to do. Whereas, again, I can't help but think of healthcare because I keep seeing these memes get trotted around about everybody having their epiphany that, wait, the American healthcare system isn't actually broken. It's functioning the way it's supposed to. And it's like people bristle at supposed to because, of course, it's not supposed to. But the healthcare system is doing everything a normal, expected, complex, adaptive system does in response to the incentives and the affordances that exist in the system. So for everybody who wants to fix the healthcare system, that is where I think that quote, makes me mad, but we don't have to belabor all the why because you just did. This is not about fixing a broken component that, if fixed, would lead to everyone having better health outcomes. It is simply the dispositional reality of the current myriad of affordances and constraints that give rise to this thing that is American healthcare. And it's not futile to try to change it because we can change and work on those affordances and constraints. But until we kind of get a little bit more access to the things that are up in the counterfactual corner of the estuarine map, there's an uphill climb here on this one. So Sisyphus, get to work, man.
Where do I want to? So
nowhere. We have to.
Yeah, we do.
No,
and I was gonna kick us off into Dadaism and surrealism, but maybe we need to sort of bring someone on to run there because that's a whole other world there. But to me, those are still really important components of the sense making, but also those exist because the schema itself exists, and the destabilizing of that schema is the benefit of that. Us having surrealism and Dadaism and absurdity and everything else that we've been talking about. Because it's the feeling around in the dark metaphor that I use all the time. If that's it, then the edges are that is getting discovered through that, not through trying to define what it is in the center, but finding what it's not on the edges.
Yeah, maybe we just need that episode. Let's just talk about all that kind of stuff. Because that's also a good place where, when I was saying earlier, it isn't just for the intellectual kind of rigor of complexity that these things are relevant. The reason I am such a huge fan of Cormac McCarthy is because I think both you see the implications of complexity in his work, not just because he spent all that time at Santa Fe, well before he even did that. I think he ended up at Santa Fe because of those instincts. Also, it's all absurdist. That dude was like the walking, talking, writing representation of living a life through absurdism. So yes, we should talk about art and only art in any form for like one of our episodes.
We've never done a commentary video. Maybe we should just like watch some Monty Python and Ren and Stimpy,
especially the last season of Flying Circus, which often gets described as like all of Python is absurdist in a way, right. But there is this kind of adjacent use of the word absurdist where people do actually mean absurdist in the Camus sense, but then they do also just mean like absurd humor, which is just absurd in the colloquial sense. So like I think Python does the two at the same time. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll throw some what's Tim and Eric and some Ren and Stimpy in there as well. And
Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty, absolutely. Yeah. Then you can get into you can go down all sorts of rabbit holes on that. Absolutely.
Cool. We'll do that at some point. Maybe we should have that very special episode where we should do it live. Okay. Everyone add a comment and convince us that that's something that you want. Otherwise, we'll let that one actually
fizzle a little bit. We'll see if you can motivate us.
I'm gonna hit stop and we'll pick up somewhere on the next one.